Okay, let's move to the third part. And I think it's time to introduce our good friend causal diagram. And in this part, I'm going to draw a graph that characterizes causal relations among factors for the previous example. And notice that in the title here, I say causal insufficiency. I mean, we're in a more specific scenario, not a general one. So there are more details should be added into the causal link. Let's say if it is the government who take control over, how to deal with issues about climate change. So here I draw the arrow, and I also assume that the government will function this depends on its assessment on human influence. For example, by assessing the performance of industrial development, uh, with the industrial growth, there are some problematic issues such as greenhouse gases emission. So I will draw it out here. And you'll notice that here I use a more detailed version of human influence. I say it is the industrial development because there are so many types of influence. I just talking about the industrial, and because I want to put you into a more specific context. Okay, so when it comes to nature force and climate change, maybe we have something going like this. Take fire, widespread fire. It will, create a dense smoke, which will have some bad things, like what we call the emission migration. It is sort of like something like an atmospheric circulation around our ecological system. Will have some bad impact on climate. Okay, so now give a specific diagram. I want to point out point here, which is a bit controversial. Uh, you know, uh, Although we say industrial developments will have some bad impacts, but there are also some goodness. For example, we have techniques such as drones and satellites, which can help us better detect where and when the megafire happen. So in that sense, sometimes we say human influence can help protect our climate from the damage of nature force. So, I would draw arrows here, which I mark as the red color. And to describe this phenomenon, we say this is about terminology. We say a causal preemption happen. So when a causal preemption happen, the result is it will invalidate the causal effect from the emission migration. And this is quite obvious if you think of it. The Wi-Fi was extinguished, so it literally don't have any power to have its further impact on climate. So what I want to tell you from this diagram, you see, at the first glance, we say both human influence and nature force are necessary course to the climate change. I mean, if you think of it, if there's not human influence, no nature force, climate change will not happen, right? But on the other side, neither of them is sufficiency course to the climate change. Just as we analyzed before, if we think of the causal relations between human influence and climate change, then we say essentially their interactions are depends on a delicate balance about how the government itself uh, deal with such a thing, right? And in terms of nature force and climate change, we say its causal mechanism can sometimes be interrupted by our human power. So neither of them can sufficiently produce or generates causal effect to the climate change. So this motivates us to take a step back and think of its original definition. You know, at first we define the cause as sufficiency. We measure whether the cause can sufficiently produce this effect. But now let's make a big change. Let's say we now define whether the cause is sufficiency. We we measure whether the cause can sufficiently sustain its effect, sustain, not produce. So to better understand this, let's take a perspective of the frame of reference. And here I will draw the horizontal axis as the causal mechanism and the vertical one as the causes we're analyzing. And if you focus on the mechanism between nature force and climate change, just as we mentioned before, we say the mechanism can sometimes be interrupted by this parallel cause, the human influence. Okay, so in that sense, we say the human force, the mechanism, causal mechanism of sorry, nature force, the causal mechanism of nature force is unsustainable. And if we flip around the situation and focus on the human influence, and it's less obvious that there has something to do with the nature force and political resistance. So given this picture, we say the human influence is more likely to sustain its causal effect to the climate change. So this gives us the evidence. Despite both human influence and nature force are not insufficiency cause to climate change, but given that stance, we say human influence is more likely to sustain its causal effect. So that we have the evidence to say human influence should be blamed for global warming. So that is how we get from this example.